In the last video, we talked about how to interpret the illustrative use of the prophet, and basically what that means is sometimes God will tell the prophet, "Go do this, go do that," and those actions themselves are a message to the audience. So, and we talked about Hosea marrying a prostitute. By marrying a prostitute, the act of marrying and being married to a prostitute was a message unto itself. And then we said, okay, the two questions you ask yourself when God is using a prophet in that way is, number one, what are the parallels between the illustration and reality? And then what is God's desired result? And I think those are the two questions you ask yourself when God is using a prophet illustratively. But what about when it's just God just gives the prophet a verbal message? How do we interpret that verbal message? For that, I've got Obadiah on the screen here. I picked Obadiah because there is no narrative. In Hosea, there's a little story that goes along with the prophecy. The same thing is true of Daniel and Jonah. In this case, it's just a vision, or just a message. Verse 1, the vision of the Lord, thus saith the Lord concerning Edom. And boom, we get right into the message. There is no real storyline attached to it. And so it's a good place to start. Now, I can really just summarize this, your strategy for understanding prophetic messages like this, with one sentence, and that is, use good commentaries. And I know that sounds like such a cop-out as a hermeneutics instructor, just to tell you just to use commentaries, but I'm gonna kind of illustrate as I go through this. These prophecies are steeped in so much history that unless you're really familiar with the history that they're dealing with geography and a lot of these historical elements, you're gonna miss out on the meaning of it. It's just impossible. So you can get away with, as I said before, you can get away with not using commentaries in a lot of genres, but when it gets to prophecy, you're really gonna have to be comfortable breaking out with some books and looking into them. Let me give you an example. Edom, for example, he says this is what the Lord says concerning Edom. You got to know who Edom is, first of all. And if you don't know what Edom is, then you're already not knowing what the prophecy is about. Now, for your sake, I'll just tell you that Edom is the nation that descended from Esau, which is Jacob's brother. So technically, Edom is the brother nation to Israel. And so that's what's happening there. Now, I'll kind of just summarize this for you, and then we'll look at a couple specific passages. But God is really angry with Edom. Edom has been taking advantage of Israel's weakened state at this point. Israel is not at a strong point, and Edom is taking advantage of them. And so God is about to tell Edom that they will be destroyed, completely and utterly destroyed, for taking advantage of their brother Jacob. Now, I was able to just tell you that. I'm familiar enough with the history that I can just tell you that. But if you don't know this, then it's not going to make sense. So in order for you to know that, you'd have to open up a commentary and read the historical context behind the prophecy. But in any case, there you have it. Edom is the brother nation of Israel that has been taking advantage of Israel's weakened state. God is angry, and so he's going to destroy Edom. So let's take a look at a couple of passages here. The arrogance of your heart has deceived you, you who live in the clefts of the rock, in the loftiness of your dwelling place. Obviously, this is poetry, and we talked about interpreting poetry, that there's parallel lines. This is somewhat of a parallel of echo, in the sense of these lines are kind of building upon each other here, in the sense that you who live in the clefts of the rock, in the loftiness of your dwelling place. And so God is kind of speaking to them as far as their arrogance goes because of their strongholds. Now, the author assumes that his readers know exactly what he's describing, and you probably don't. You might not know that Edom were mountain dwellers. They were dwelling in fortresses. And in fact, if you go online and Google the city of Petra, Petra used to be an Edomite stronghold. And look it up if you don't know what I'm talking about. But that'll give you a visual of what the prophet Obadiah means when he says, "You who live in the clefts of the rock, in the loftiness of your dwelling place." He really was meaning that they were arrogant because of their fortresses, or their fortress cities. They build high like eagles, build their nests of stars. So again, the prophet is just assuming that you really understand a lot about Edom that you probably don't. Here again, he references Esau. Of course, I just pointed out that Esau and Edom are on the same. Esau is the patriarch of Edom. Now, I already told you that Esau was Jacob's brother, and you probably know that by now, but if you didn't make the connection between Edom and Jacob, then you'd be kind of confused at verse 10. He says, "Because of your violence to your brother Jacob, you will be covered with shame." At this point, you have to know what's happening historically is that Israel, here represented by Jacob, is in a politically weakened state, to the point that Edom is pillaging and attacking Israel, not with a full-blown military strike, but just taking advantage of their weakened state. And so when God says, "Because of your violence to your brother Jacob, you will be covered with shame," this is an important verse because it's telling us why this is happening to them. And of course, why does he call them brothers? Do not gloat over your brother's day. Don't gloat over what's happening to Judah or Jacob. And so anyway, really what I'm trying to point out here is just line after line. There's just so much historical information that if you're not familiar with it, for example, Teman is a stronghold of Edom. If you don't know what Teman is, that's not going to make any sense. You might think it's his cousin or something. So, and anyway, like I said before, to summarize how to interpret these guys, how to interpret a prophetic message like this, you're really going to have to open up a commentary, and as you're reading along, you're going to have to read historical information to explain almost every single line. And I know that sounds incredibly tedious, but I really don't know of an easier way to teach you how to read prophecy. It really is that much work, and you just got to work through it. So break out with your commentaries, get used to reading them, and get ready to learn a lot about history.